Okay, so what did I write? Or what cube did I submit? Well, if you've been following my stream at all, you'll know or be familiar with this cube. I think it is, cube ID is just my name, Derek. Somebody wants to post that in the old chatteroony, that'd be nice. So I submitted this cube. I've talked about this cube a lot on stream. I've worked on this cube a lot over the last couple of years. And I believe that it is worthy of being selected as a competitive cube environment that we can use during the main event. And I'm going to hopefully sell you all on it today. So, first and foremost, regarding the submission, I have some notes here I'm looking at. Cube is all about, a cube as a focus is about the idea. It's about the what if. And I've talked about this before on the stream. Thank you, Wombat. Cube is all about the idea and the exploration of that idea and the execution of that idea. And that idea I can sum up with as saying, what if? You know, what if I built a cube entirely out of commons? What if I built the most unfair powered cube possible? What if I only used colorless cards? Shout out to Isticle for the Devoid cube. What if I tried to evoke the Innistrad plane? Or what if I tried to evoke the original Ravnica draft environment? What if I just played with all the cards that I think that are sweet and that I want to play with? All of these are approaches to design for a cube, and I believe it all comes down to a what if question. So naturally, you can answer it a couple different ways. My cube, I can give you two main answers to what if, or like two main explorations. So to me, when we have multiple answers that compete with each other, we have to prioritize them. So here are my two what ifs. What if we built a cube that played more like constructed than limited? Like constructed play patterns, constructed archetypes. And then the other one is, what if we designed outward from the mana fixing lands? Those are the two main focuses. Now what takes priority, I think, is what if we designed a cube that had more constructed play patterns? The mana fixing, the mechanical design of mana fixing, while the more, I think, interesting aspect of the cube definitely has a little bit less of a priority than designing for constructed play patterns. Mostly because designing for constructed means you need to have constructed quality mana bases. So in the priority tier list, for me, those are the two main things: constructed play patterns, mechanically outward from the lands. Is this a top-down or a bottom-up design? This is a bottom-up design. This is a mechanical design. But top-down design means that it's more based on flavor or aesthetics. You know, an old school cube is a more top-down design. An Innistrad cube is a more top-down design. Something that's focused on my priorities is more bottom-up. It's more mechanics first, and the mechanics feed into the flavor. Now, one thing I want to say first and foremost, or now, before we get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty of this, is that this cube was not designed by myself in isolation. This cube was designed as part of a collaborative process with a couple of other cube designers. Each of us designed this are 3 different versions of these cubes that were within 10 cards of each other, and since then we've all grown outward to more closely identify them to how we prefer to play them. The 2 other designers are probably not in the audience. Well, at least I can't see them. But if they do come in, I will point them out. But they're members of a Discord server or several Discord servers. One of them is a very divisive personality in the community. But they're both dear friends of mine, very intelligent people, great collaborators. So I do not take full ownership of this cube. This cube, while this build and this particular set of cards is mine, this is an idea that was spawned from 3 different people. So I want to get that out of the way right now, because it's important that everybody knows this, that like this is not solely my idea, but this version of the cube is my idea. Like the way this is built, what the archetypes are, and how it plays. But the focal points, the what ifs, were designed as a collaboration. Yeah, divisive. So let's look at the list. And let's look at the list and let's talk about what makes this cube particular different from maybe the cubes that you've played on Magic Online, on Arena, maybe your friends' cubes or other cubes that all kind of feel like if I told you were playing a powerful cube, a legacy cube, a traditional unpowered cube, or even something like a modern cube. These kind of like vacuous terms that like kind of define a power level expectation. What makes this cube different from all of that? So right away, as you scroll through the list, you can see that the mana fixing is unbelievably abundant. Now, I've gone over this on stream many, many times, my thoughts on mana fixing. There's enough mana fixing in this cube so that everybody has the chance to build a beautiful, perfect mana base. There's 5 of each dual, 4 of each fetch, all the horizon lands, all the triomes, and then a bunch of utility lands. There's a ton of mana fixing, and if you look at the analysis of the cube, I believe it's over 20% of the cube. 22.85%. Right away, that should be a huge flag to you that something's very different about this cube. That we're playing something very different than a legacy cube, for instance, or any of the popular Magic Online cubes that you've played in the last couple of years. So like I said, this design choice of focusing on having perfect mana, or the ability to draft perfect mana, was a mechanical choice that informed a lot of the design decisions and what was possible for us in the process of exploring the space that we created by having all these lands. So a lot changes in the texture of the individual card selection and the gameplay. Sorry, allergies today are rough. And let's go over some of what that means. So, when all of your lands have basic land types, and all of them come into play untapped, essentially, except for the triomes, but everything has a land type, you can really tap into cards that care about controlling land types, having land types on the battlefield, let me give you some examples here. A card like Evasive Action. Maybe we can pull that up a little bit more. A card like Evasive Action, not a card that you normally see in a, powered cube or in a high-powered cube. And for good reason. 2 mana, instant, counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 for each land type among lands you control. In a normal environment with, even with a lot of fixing, you're going to be playing with a lot of non-basic lands that don't have land types. And once you have land types, all of a sudden Evasive Action turns from a quench to a hard counterspell much more of the time than Mana Leak, and for the same mana cost. It's a small thing to have a reactive spell get better, but it's part of the picture that I'm painting here. Let's keep going with blue cards. A card like Gush. This is a card that, most people don't put in their cubes anymore, if they ever did, because it's, for most people, a very expensive draw spell. Most of the time, it's 5 mana instant draw 2 cards. But when you can consistently and reliably use its alternate cost, you can up the power level of you're upping the power level of what's possible. You're expanding what's possible by running the card in your cube. For instance, a card like Mystic Sanctuary becomes incredibly powerful when you have access to Gush, and you have and you can create draw spell loops with those two. It becomes incredibly powerful and reliable with cards like Cryptic Command, and you can create soft locks as a control deck. Yes, I know about the Gush book. I have not read it. That's just one example of opening up mana fixing lands. Other things that I've done that matter. Let's see. Tribal Flames, so like domain cards. Other cards that we've played here in the past that have taken part of this is, at one point, I've had Landfall Zoo in the cube. So cards like Wild Nacatl, Curd Ape, and Loam Lion and become consistently 1 mana 2/3s. Which, if you're trying to support an aggressive deck in a cube where you're trying to push the limits on like how Constructed is supposed to play, then having 1 mana 2/3s over Jackal Pups becomes a much more appealing solution to building an aggro deck. Sorry about the coughing, everybody. So, what are some other examples I can show you? Lava Dart. Let's see. You can look through the list and you get an idea. Vidalcan Shackles. Yeah. And, right, so this idea, the mana fixing focus, I had misdirection here and I cut it and I don't remember why, but it's like in the sideboard right now. This is relevant for both the dual lands and the fetch lands. So the dynamic I was talking about was having access to a lot of dual lands with land types. Having a lot of fetch lands gives you a whole other set of incentives for kinds of cards you want to play. Most people call the fetch lands some of the most powerful lands ever printed. I agree with you. As are the Alpha Beta original duels. So what do the fetch lands offer us? They offer us a lot of graveyard interaction. They offer us delve spells, delirium spells, escape spells. Cards like cards go from like solid to amazing, like Tireless Tracker and Ramming Up Excavator, and Renin 6, because while you can't, do some bullshit like Return Wasteland and Strip Mine with Renin 6, having constant value with, Windswept Heath can just keep fetching out lands. Also incredibly powerful. So a lot of the cube comes out of what's possible with the mana fixing. I'm gonna take another drink because, oh boy, and I'm tired and I'm talking a lot already. Everybody doing okay so far? Because I'm choking on myself over here. So, mana fixing is one thing. Now, obviously, this is a breaking singleton concept. So, how else is this cube different aside from the lands? Well, we're breaking singleton on non-lands as well. This is a lot more of a gray area, especially for a lot of cube people, both players and designers. So I wanted to talk a little bit more in depth about what breaking singleton does. So given that we want to play more constructed play patterns, there are some archetypes that I want to support where the focal point, the focal threat of the archetype, or the focal spell of the archetype needs additional copies because of how mechanically unique the card is. Stoneforge Mystic. Sure, we've all looked at the card Relic Runner, not the same card. Stoneforge Mystic is a card that a lot of people love to play, is an archetype in of itself, and benefits a lot from having multiple copies in a cube because I can run more of the crazy equipment. Like I can have Batterskull and Kuldra and Three Swords and Jite and Shadow Spear and Lion Sash all together because I have 2 copies of Stoneforge. Somebody can draft both and they can build a Stoneblade deck. I'm playing 2 copies of Delver of Secrets. Delver is mechanically unique. There's really not another card that we can play that approximates this. Yeah, there's Terramander and there's Symmetry Sage. Those cards suck compared to what Delver can do in Constructed. So breaking on this signals to my drafters that, hey, you can build a Delver deck. You can build a blue-red X blue tempo deck. The newly added Death Shadow, which I'm still not completely locked in on how that's going to work, because I'm questioning a couple other things I need to change about the cube. But there's no other card like Death Shadow. Yeah, we got Scourge of the Skyclaves. We got Shadow of Mortality. But there's nothing really quite like Death Shadow, both in casting cost and and power level. And when you give people the opportunity to drop multiple copies, you're really giving people the opportunity to build around the card and know that it's going to show up more reliably in their deck. So what do I have here? Champion of the Parish, Delver, Stoneforge, Collected Company. I have 2 copies of Urza's Saga, Death Shadow, and what else? I think that's it for like relevant pieces of duplication. So all those cards signal very, very strongly to my players that I want them to build around these cards, and that something exists whereby they can feel like they're building a competitive deck with this as one of the main focal points of it. It feeds directly into my priority of constructed play patterns. This is very, very unique. I think I've seen some people play with multiple Delvers before, but outside of my, small group of people that I design with, there's really not a lot of other people. Oh, I forgot Tarmogoyf, my sweet baby angel. I forgot that there's not a lot of other people that do this kind of thing with threats or with, building, like, emphasizing certain archetypes by duplicating these core pieces. So those are two really major ways that this is going to play differently than other cubes that you've played. Breaking singleton on these, I've talked about this probably ad nauseum. I've had people on to talk about this, I think. I've gone whole episodes where I talk about breaking singleton. There's a lot to be gained here. You lose every card being unique, and you lose that sort of like infinite novelty in card interactions, like unique interactions. But my cube isn't designed to kind of to explore that space as much as it is trying to explore like other aspects of Magic, namely deck building. So that's a really good segue into my final point on this, which is how is this different? Which is that I really believe that this cube is designed for a more competitive-minded drafter and player. I believe that a build like this mostly benefits, like, the person who it is best for are people who are trying to spike a draft. Now, what that means is, for most people that play Cube, it's a space where they don't have to worry about constructed Magic, where they don't have to, like, worry about, like, the limited format, the constructed format. They can do whatever. They can get crazy, they can get wacky, they can see these strange things happen. They can live the dream. This cube doesn't reward that approach to drafting. It rewards trying to build a streamlined, consistent, constructed deck. Now, that doesn't mean that we're lane drafting. That doesn't mean that every card is parasitic to one archetype. But there is a lot of archetypal parasitism that exists in the cube. And it's no different than having mono white, mono red, mono green cards, control cards, etc. They're just focused on being consistent and powerful. And a common misconception with this cube, the way that it's designed, and the mere presence of all of these lands, is that greed piles reign. Because I can just take the fixing and take the good cards and play a good card pile. And while that is not untrue, in that you can just take fixing and cards and like build like a tap out control deck or a mid-range deck of some kind. A lot of people approach this format that way, and like even just in my last draft, multiple people just drafted 5-color. I think 3 people tried to draft 5-color nonsense. And I mean, they had a great time. They loved it. They loved just playing a bunch of colors and playing a bunch of gold cards and trying to grind out, which is certainly a way you can interpret the cube. But the cube is the people who approach drafting it from trying to build something that is a tight machine are most rewarded for their efforts. Because the power in consistency is something that trumps just playing a bunch of stuff on rate. Which remind me to go back to that, because that's actually part of a later part of this discussion or exploration of this cube. So the people who are trying to read for what's open, build the best deck they can based on their seat, and try to play the tightest Magic they can are going to find success in this cube. You can draft this cube to be a pile, into a pile, and have a great time, but you're not going to be necessarily as successful as somebody that's building a machine. So this cube is more likely to reward somebody who's really spiky rather than somebody who just wants to blow off some steam and have fun. Not to say those two things can't happen together, but a lot of times cubes are designed for primarily to explore, to do dumb, broken, ridiculous things, or to just do a bunch of like nonsense, as some people like to call it. Yeah, so this is very different from that approach to cube drafting. This is a competitive cube, I believe. Okay. Next point. So I've talked about how this is different. So let's go over what the archetypes are, how they've changed since the inception of the cube, where we're at now, and where I see the cube going leading up into Cubecon, let's assume that it's going to get picked, right? Well, so let's go through that. I got a new follower. Hello, new follower. Okay. So, logistically. Oh, you know what? Final note to make on how is this different. This is a 4-pack draft. 4 packs, 16 cards, as opposed to 3 packs, 15 cards. Couple of reasons for that. 4 packs, bigger pool, accommodates all the mana fixing, so that you have enough time to get the mana and to build your deck. It also means, with a larger card pool, that you have access to a lot of cards outside of your initial 40 that you can use to sideboard with. And there's a lot of sideboarding that occurs in this environment. You want to build a deck and build an incredible sideboard to go along with it. There are some limitations on custom rules. As far as I'm aware, as long as there's not too much seeding and prep that goes into it, something like just an additional pack is no problem. A lot of people like to do 5 packs of 9. This is just 4 packs of 16. I don't seed things. I don't have a predetermined way to organize the packs. Shuffle up, make the packs, and just go. That is fine. There's other people that had took more issue with it because there was a lot more tension and they needed a very specific kind of draft experience that couldn't be accommodated by the rate at which we need to, rate at which we're going to need to be drafting this stuff. Okay, so that's very different, right? Most people, there's not a big enough pool to really think about sideboarding. And what people find as they draft the cube is that all the cards are so good that people end up a little overwhelmed with how my final deck's gonna look. The last time I drafted the cube, somebody built a 48 card deck because I didn't know what to cut from their deck. Now, this also leans into rewarding good deck building, rewarding good approach to drafting sideboard cards, having a game plan. If your opponent is faster than you, if your opponent is slower than you, how do you engage based on a heavy removal deck, a heavy creature deck, right? So there's a lot of zigging and zagging that can happen after board, and that's exciting to me because I love sideboarding. Okay, so what are the archetypes? So I'm telling you all this stuff about what's possible and how it's different. So if you sit down to draft this cube, what are you looking to draft? All right. So, Delver of Secrets. So, blue, red, X tempo. These are some of the more aggressive decks we're going to start with. So, blue tempo, Delver stuff, is, technically speaking, a mid-range deck. In terms of, the quadrants of, archetypes. Aggro control is basically just mid-range, but it's doing more stack interaction than like a green mid-range deck would. So a Delver focused, threats plus disruption, snowballing an advantage early is something that is possible here. There's a lot of support. Just look at, what I have in blue and red, right? Newly added Ledger Shredder, right? We have my Delvers, I have my Dragon's Rage Channeler, Ragavan, Soulscar Mage, Monastery Swiftspear, that kind of stuff. Followed up by counter spells, removal spells, card draw. Yeah. Red White X Winota Joiner of Forces. This is Winota. This is a little bit of green creature ramp. This is a lot of non-human stuff, token makers, that then playing Winota, which I have 2 copies of in the cube, playing Winota and spiking those hits off of it. I have a lot of targets that are also just castable cards. Probably the hardest would be Tovolar's Huntmaster. But I have other targets. This is just a red-white aggressive deck base and is usually built as a Naya deck. It could also be a Mardu deck. But it's just looking to ramp out a bunch of creatures and had some crazy hits off Winota. It's a little more of a divisive archetype. Some people really hate playing against it. But I like having this in the cube still. As a way to play a really, really pushed aggressive red-white deck. Another aggressive deck. White-Green X Humans. This is new. I've got literally 1 rep off of this. Before, we used to have Zoo, as I mentioned before, in the cube. And I still really like Zoo, and I might actually go back to Zoo if this doesn't work out. But there's about as much space taken up by Zoo that there is Humans. And Humans has incidental synergies just from the nature of things being human that have some bleed over into other archetypes. I focus on Champion of the Parish as the ideal 1-drop. There's all the stuff you'd find in constructed Humans decks in here. And while I don't have the 5-color lands in here, like Ancient Ziggurat, Mana Confluence, City of Brass, whatever all the other ones are, Unclaimed Territory and stuff. There's a white-green base that you can build around that plays to like a big, go wide and tall aggressive deck. It's a little more mid-rangey, and it does benefit from being able to play Collected Company, which I have 2 copies of as well. So it can play a little slower, but it has a lot of tools. And I'm very curious to see how this plays out, but this is a current, more synergistic deck that plays a little more linearly, as opposed to, say, the more open-ended kind of control-y decks that exist in the cube. The last one I'm going to talk about is Death Shadow. Death Shadow is probably primarily Grixis, but can also be Mardu. It's base black. It plays a lot of, the cube has a lot of black-based hurt myself spells. And I've doubled up on Death Shadow and played the new Death Shadows, as I brought up before. This is something that I've tested in the past, but I haven't broken Singleton on Death Shadow before. So I'm really excited to see if something like this is possible to exist in the cube as well. Right now, I only have broken on Death Shadow. The other card I would probably play 2 copies of is Street Wraith. But that's about it, I think. This is a deck that can also benefit from playing Lurrus of the Dream Den and other, such cards that you'd see in constructed versions of it. It's essentially a mid-rangey deck with a 1-mana, 8/8 or whatever that can finish the game. So there's also Dress Down, You can play it like in Modern with Kroxa, and you can play Snapcaster Mage in that, and whatever. It's giving that mid-range Grixis shell a way to like play something more synergistic. Okay, so after that we have Stoneblade, which I mentioned before. This is probably a blue-white or Esper-based deck that's trying to play a really mid-rangey, slightly reactive game plan. I can imagine this also being more proactive as well, but I built it to be a little slower, a little more reactive. Then there's Green X Classic Midrange. This is your Thoughtseize, Tarmogoyf, Liliana, Dark Confidant, Bloodbraid Elf kind of deck. That can be Jund, it can be Sultai, it can be Abzan, but it's that deck. I have 2 Tarmogoyfs in the cube. Tarmogoyf is a good creature in the cube. It is often very big. And yeah, if you just want to play some fucking mid-range pile that's not blue, or sometimes is blue, go for it. I support that fully in the cube. And then we have the control-y decks. So I have hard blue X control. This can be Jeskai, Esper, or Grixis. This is just planeswalkers, sweepers, counterspells, card draw. You know the deal. The same shit. I don't have a duplicate for this deck because it doesn't really need it. But if I was to duplicate something, it would probably be another Cryptic Command. So I will look to that probably as a potential possibility for the future. And last but not least, everybody's favorite archetype. Green X, tap out, 5-color control, featuring Niv Mizzet Reborn and Omnath, Locus of Creation. This is what everybody likes to draft in the cube. This is, when people say they want to play a Greed Pile or a 5-color nonsense deck, this is what they want. They want Niv Mizzet. They want Omnath. They want Uro. They want, they want to play Abundant Growth and Utopia Sprawl and a bunch of gold cards and a bunch of lands, and it's very supported in the cube. And up until recently, it was actually the top performing deck in the cube. It had the most 3-0s amongst all three of us that had designed versions of these cubes, and is a really interesting, has had a really measurable impact on the design of the cube, and is one of the reasons why a deck like Humans exists at all in the environment. How have these archetypes been able to blend in practice? Do folks rail themselves? No, they don't. You could go on rails and just first pick a Stoneforge Mystic, and there is some amount of parasitism that happens because not every deck wants every card, but that's no different than any other cube where there are necessary pieces of the different archetypes that are supported in the cube already, right? People that play mono red, Jackal-Pup and Sulfuric Vortex are just as parasitic as Stoneforge Mystic, really, or Tarmogoyf, or Winota Joiner of Forces. They're it's asking you to build something that's more consistent than it is something more open-ended. So it's a different approach it's a different solution to the same problem of how do you encourage people to draft archetypes? Well, I'm just going to double the card that I want you to focus on, and I want to encourage that deck to be successful and competitive whenever we sit down to draft. Is that working every time? No. It's an ongoing process, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that now. I like the Winota, for instance, if I pack one Winota, I make it if the aggro decks dry up my threats. If I pack one, pick one Winota, no, I don't think so. If you look at the list, you'll see a lot of cards that another aggro deck might want, Goblin Rabble Master, for instance, or Reckless Stormseeker. But you're gonna prioritize those cards higher as you're building up, as you're putting your threats together. So you are likely to see the cards that you want. The trick is like you only get so many picks out of each pack. You know, you can only table so much shit. So like, how do you go about, navigating your picks? How do you build your deck better? There's a lot of really, really messed up spells in this cube, and a lot of really good threats. And so you have to balance that out with like your if you have some archetype specific stuff versus generically powerful cards, removal, lands. There's a lot to navigate in the draft. Which is why it's so spiky. Because if you want to win, you're going to be pushed, you're going to be given a lot of tools and decisions to be able to build a better deck than your opponents are. Roundmaster Ronaldo is my favorite kind of curve. Man, I'm rooting for you with the showcase. If you don't make it, hope you get the chance to draft this. I would love it if you could draft this cube. I don't know how that's possible. I mean, I've drafted this cube on Cockatrice a bunch, but I know a lot of people are very anti-Cockatrice, so if y'all ever want to draft it, we can just do it that way. Okay, so I mentioned something about the Mizzet having a really measurable impact on the cube. So I think it's really important when talking about, let me go to the list here. I think it's really important when talking about cubes, like in any context, to talk about like, okay, so you have this idea and you have this list and you have this intended gameplay experience. So how has the intended gameplay experience played out for you as you've tested it? And what problems have arisen and how have you combated these problems? This is something that like is incredibly interesting to me, and like one of the marks of like a designer who's trying to refine an idea as opposed to just constantly propose new ideas. There's a lot of energy and a lot of ink spill in the cube community about new ideas, right? Like presenting, hey, I had this idea for this cube. This is a what if. This is a what if. This is a what if. And the exercise of idea creation, of ideation, is really important. But the hard work comes when playtesting and feedback and iteration start to happen, and problem solving starts to become an interest of yours. And that's been a major part of my focus on this over time. And I could not have done it alone. My collaborators have been instrumental in developing these ideas. I miss the MTGO host drafts. Oh, you mean like people drafting, like borrowing cards on MTGO? I really hope MTGO just has God accounts, because that would be lovely, eventually. Okay. Hold on, let me not get distracted too much. So, this is a really important aspect of this, because I don't want you to be like listening to this and being like, wow, he has a lot of really good ideas. This must be a really like tuned draft environment. And while I think it is tuned to some degree, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this is balanced, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that like it's, it's done, or like it's a final draft or something. This is an ongoing, ever-changing list that is trying to address some pretty serious problems. So, what's the big problem? Well, originally, so much of the design process and the space that we explored was focused on rate. What do I mean by that? What I mean is evaluating cards purely based on the rate or power level that the card exists in, and only focusing on rate. Like, two of the major focuses or points of card evaluation are rate and synergy. The rate mattered so much that we explored and exhausted the rate space while only slightly touching on the synergy space, if at all. And, I mean, we did touch on it a little bit, but like, Rate was king. And what happened was, as you'll notice, the curve of this cube is incredibly low, and there's a lot of removal, and so this is a pretty attrition heavy cube because so much of the cube is built around threats and answers that when it came down to it, as we were testing, aside from, I mean, not every time, but most of the time, the Niv Mizzet deck won the draft. And at first it was cool. You know, oh cool, the 5-color deck won. Oh cool, the 5-color deck won again. Oh, okay, the 5-color deck won again. Hey Derek, guess which deck won the draft? Niv Mizzet? Niv Mizzet. Started happening a lot. And started to become a pain point. Because what happens is, if it's attrition heavy and tempo heavy, then we're just trading resources with each other, with all the decks, and whoever can come out on top is like the last threat standing is going to take over the game. And if that last threat is a card like Omnath or Niv Mizzet, you're going to win the game by a fucking fuckload. And we had built a machine that encouraged those decks to be the most successful. Rate was king. But it got boring after a while to just know that some people would force 5-color, and whoever got the Niv Mizzet was overwhelmingly likely to win. And that sucks. I only have one copy of Niv Mizzet. But like, it exposed a hole in the theory of the cube that had to be solved. And me and the other designers of this idea set about solving it in different ways. Obviously, synergy had to combat rate. You have to take both of these things into account. How do we explore synergy in a way that is powerful and consistent and competitive with the rest of the environment? Humans was one of the ideas. It was the one that I latched onto the most. It is a more linear, as opposed to like modular, synergistic archetype. It is extremely creature heavy, and when it is greater, the cards are greater than the sum of their parts when they're working together. The idea was sound. Other things that came up were artifacts. So anybody who follows Legacy would know like an 8-cast kind of deck, where you're playing like a blue mid-range deck that uses Emry and Urza and Psy Master Thopterist alongside Thought Monitor and Thoughtcast, to, you know, great effect and grind out value with these cards. That was really appealing to me. And, you know, there's welders and there's a lot of eggs. I mean, I have a lot of 1-mana artifacts in the cube already, but I could just lean further and further into that space. But there's some things I didn't like about it. There were some things that are a little hesitant about it. You know, having to entertain the idea of putting Mox Opal into my cube was not something I really wanted to do. Because Mox Opal is Mox Opal. And it's incredibly narrow. It made me feel like I was giving a really big chunk of the cube to one person. But it's still something that's on my burner. It's something that like came up as a viable option because it had the right tools. And so it's still there. The other thing was like Aristocrat Sacrifice, which got actually a huge boon from Streets of New Capenna because they added this spell aristocrats element to it, where like before a lot of these cards would fail to like there wasn't a critical mass of them, but now we're getting some more tools for that feel a little more generic. Feel like I could play them in a outside of an aristocrats deck, or like that, sacrifice, like cards like Mayhem Devil and Village Rites and Deadly Dispute were things that were interesting to me. So that's another thing that was looking to solve it. The other aspect of the other one that came up was enchantments, which I didn't really care for, but that's like a recent huge boon with Neon Dynasty. Just like a ton of enchantments and enchantment payoffs and cards like Sithis and Enigmatic Incarnation. And again, playing the synergistic value pile that could outvalue the like greed piles and the control decks, and keep on pace with some of the stuff that was like more mid-rangey as well. I chose to go with humans. I'm not sure how it's going to play. I need more testing with it. But it's pretty clear to me that high synergy stuff is what's going to combat the pushed rate of a lot of these generically powerful cards. So what the balance of that looks like and how that's going to be refined as I test, I have a lot of questions about it. And so this list isn't really finalized as it sits now, because I need to make sure that this stuff is kind of working together. Where everything feels competitive, where everything feels consistently draftable, where everything feels like if you were in that seat, you would feel confident knowing that you could draft the deck that was open for you, and that you were giving yourself the best chance to win. That's a lot. That's a lot to ask of 8 seats. However, I think it's doable. I'm not sure how long it'll take, but I'm pretty sure I'm on the path. Especially since we identified the issue. Especially once we identified that Niv Mizzet was a problem. That we had encouraged a deck to be dominant because we had a hole in our design process. And I'm really thankful that it was designed in collaboration, this cube, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to see that. So, yeah, those are that's a concern, or that's like a area that needs work in the cube. However, largely when it's drafted, it plays well. People kind of get what's going on. If they don't, that's okay. Might take a couple drafts for somebody to like tune into what the cube is doing, because it behaves so differently from other people's environments. Yeah, so let's wrap this up then, now that I've gone through a little bit of that. Let me see. Let's wrap this up. So, all in all, I believe that this cube is unique. I think it's competitive. I think that it's the right fit for needing cubes to kind of like encourage people to be spiky in a competition. I think that there's a lot of personality in this cube that makes it uniquely identifiable. Like it has its own point of view, and breaking singleton, playing a lot of lands, feeling more like constructed than limited is something that we don't get very often in cubes. And I think that that's something that we could, feature at Cubecon. I think that's something that we could explore a little bit more in the cube community in general. But I guess my final point is like, this is not. This is my approach or my proposal for an environment, but it is not the kind of monolithic de facto, this is what a cube should look more like. I think as long as you understand what your goals are and you understand how to work through problems and get good playtests going, and people are having fun, then you can treat it like a piece of like a piece of design. And I think as a piece of design, this cube has a lot of interest, has a lot to say, and I think that's something that we can hold up at Cubecon as a solid example of a piece of the cube community that should be celebrated. How'd I do?